Welcome. Thank you for watching this teaching video from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. Please check out our other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe. Our mission is to help people come to know Jesus better and love Him more every day. We believe this will not only help our own spiritual growth, but also help us better influence the community and the world for Christ. For more information about Oak Tree, please visit us at oaktreechurch.com. There you'll find past message series, online giving options, and more information about our discipleship process that we call The Path. Now enjoy this message. We'd love to hear from you in the comments or the website contact form. Thank you.
All right, last week we were working in 1 Timothy chapter 2. We finished chapter 2, and I said it was sort of this interesting, we're sort of introducing this concept that people like to throw everything else away in the context and say, aha, this is about women in ministry, bum, 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 right? And nobody really likes to tackle that. But we did, because it's one of the benefits of pushing straight through a book. You don't get to skip. People note. You would notice if I said, we're going to go to chapter 4 today. You're like, hold on a second. I was here last week. I have not missed anything. When did we do chapter 3? Well, chapter 3 is tough. We're not going to do that. I don't want to talk about that. So we're going to be in chapter 4. You see, that doesn't work very well. So you'd catch me on that, and then, we'd have problems. So we have to deal with the passages that are sometimes difficult. And it's okay to do that. And I really love what we do a second hour where we can hash through some of those things as well. So it's really cool. The topic continues, okay? And the way I introduced it last week is not just women in ministry. It's sort of a stupid topic, but because it shouldn't be a conversation anyway for the most part. What he's actually doing, what Paul is actually doing here, is he is going to be speaking to specific groups within the church. And everybody in the church needs to know this information, but he's giving instructions to specific groups. Last week, in chapter 2, verses 8 through 15, we addressed two of them. Men, this is what I want you to do. Men of the church, here's a very important task for you. Women of the church, here's a very important task for you. Here's how you're supposed to live. Here's how you're supposed to function. This is very important. It contributes to the godliness and dignity that he opened chapter 2 with. Okay, and we have to keep that in our minds as the context. What is Paul's goal? Why is he laying all this stuff out? Because there's a certain way the church is supposed to interact with the world. There's a certain way that the church, that Christians are supposed to be seen by the world. How we're supposed to live in this world. And Paul described that back at the beginning of chapter 2. We just scroll all the way back to chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. I urge that requests and prayers and intercessions and thanks be offered on behalf of all people, even for kings and all who are in authority, regardless of what the election does, right? Right? All the kings, all of those who are in authority, government officials. Government politics is never going to save us. It's always going to devolve. It's going to get worse eventually. Even if we have little things where we like, hey, yay, we had some wins or whatever, it's going to get worse. And so we cannot live, this is a little sidebar in case you hadn't noticed, we cannot live simply in reaction to elections. We cannot live in reaction to what's going on around us. Obviously, there's a little of that, but that can't drive us, right? That can't drive what we believe. It can't drive how we live. Paul says, listen, I don't care who is in authority. I don't care who your government officials are. I don't care who your kings are, who your whatever. Pray for them, and really all people. And here's one of the things we should be praying for so that we can lead a peaceful and quiet life. But not a peaceful and quiet life where we can do just anything we want to, but so that we can live in God, on all godliness and dignity, right? And so as we're praying for that, as we're living that, men, women, and then we're going to look at some more groups over these next couple of chapters, we have to keep in mind that Paul is reminding us there is a right way for Christians to live. We don't just get to make it up. We don't just get to make it up. In fact, I'll just give you a preview. We'll probably get to this next week. We should get to this next week. But right at the end of chapter 3, We're not going to do this today. Right at the end of chapter 3, look at verses 14 and 15. I hope to come to you soon. I don't think he did come to him soon. He just left Timothy hanging out there in Ephesus. He put that in there just to make Timothy feel a little bit better, I think. I hope to come soon. I'm not going to. Whatever. But I'm writing these instructions to you in case I'm delayed to, look at verse 15, to let you know how people ought to conduct themselves in the household of God. There is an ought. Isn't that interesting? There is an ought. And the household of God, he explains, because it is the church of the living God, it is the support and the bulwark of the truth. We'll spend some more time on that next week when we get there. But the church is supposed to be upholding the truth, which is why it's so important that we live in all godliness and dignity. So even when people don't believe what we believe, even if they don't want to agree with us, at least they can look at us and say, you're living really good lives, you're living clean lives, you obviously believe what you say. You know people who say one thing and live completely differently, don't you? Okay? If all we did was look at their lives, we would say, I'm not sure that you even believe what you say you believe, because there's nothing in your life that backs it up. Paul said there is an ought. There is an is, that's truth, and there is an ought, and that's our response to the truth. Is and ought. And we'll spend more time on that next time. But there is a way we're supposed to live. And so that's why throughout this letter, he's giving these commands. Okay, men, here's this. Women, here's this. Today we move on to this third group, and this is elders or overseers or pastors, depending on how you want to look at it. We're going to use the term, all of them. Okay, we're going to use all of them. Why pick one when you can have three? Here's the setup, chapter 3, verse 1. This saying is trustworthy. This is one of a handful of trustworthy sayings or faithful sayings that we're going to see in this letter. We already saw one back in chapter 1, verse 15. This saying is trustworthy and deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Okay, that's a pretty big trustworthy statement, isn't it? That's a faithful saying. Now, look at what he puts on the same level. This is what amazes me. Okay, it's not that chapter 3, verse 1 is a trustworthy saying. It's that he uses the same phrase, the same description for this as he did in chapter 1, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. It's like he's putting them on the same level. That should tell us a little something about what he's about ready to say, right? What is he saying? If someone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a good work. If someone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a good work. Like, hold on a second. Overseer is not one of the words that you talked about. I thought we said elder, we said pastor, and we said, nope, not deacon. That's another group. I think I said overseer. I think I did. Okay, never mind then. It's one we don't use very often. That's why I forget it. There are actually three terms. There are three terms that are used interchangeably. Three terms that are used interchangeably in this, and this is where we're going to spend a good chunk of our time today. What I want you to notice is that Paul encouraged people to want to be an overseer in the church. He said, if you want it, that's great. It's a good work to do if you want it. Automatically, that tells me that much like other leadership positions, we shouldn't be forcing people into those positions, right? If you don't want to be in a leadership role, now sometimes you might nudge somebody. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. I think you'd be a great leader, and it's okay. But there are people who just, I don't want this. We should not push people into it if they don't want it. Now, the flip side is also true. Just because somebody wants to do something doesn't mean that they should do it, right? Right? And so what Paul is going to do is over the next 6 verses, he's going to give a list of character qualifications. Okay, so somebody wants to be this. By the way, he has not eliminated women yet. Okay, so if all we had was verse 1, we can have both men and women as overseers. All right, we'll see where I think he does eliminate, he does restrict. But right now he doesn't do that. But the point is that you need to want it. So, first, and I think this is a perfectly legitimate question, that is, would you be, I don't need a response right now, but would you be interested in being an elder in a local church? That's a question that is worth asking. Is this something that I would like to do? Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on here, but he starts by saying you should want it. If you don't want it, then that's fine. So that's my first question for you. Is that something that you're interested in? Okay, because that would be good. He's encouraging people to want to be an overseer. The overseer then must be. The overseer then must be. And this is where he's going to get into this list of, some people use the term qualifications. It's not my favorite word, because if they were true qualifications, then nobody matches. Because this said, what we're going to see, this sets up a level of almost perfection, at least in these areas, and nobody matches them perfectly. So if these are the qualification for elder or overseer, nobody matches. We don't have elders. It doesn't matter whether you want it or not. It doesn't matter whether I want it or not, because we're all disqualified. Everybody. Don't even have to think about men or women. Doesn't matter. Everybody's disqualified. So qualification is a little bit of a strong word. Okay? I prefer the term characteristics. These are the things that characterize elders, or should characterize elders, and the same thing with deacons a little bit further down. These are these characteristics that we're looking for. These are the character traits, the character qualities. So, if you answered that question a minute ago, yeah, I think maybe I'd be interested in this, then this passage is for you. Pay attention and see, just in your own heart, if this is something that you think, yeah, I think these are character traits. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not perfect, but I think these are character traits that I have, and I think that I could fulfill this, and that would be great. Okay. Before we get to that list, I want to explore the office, the role, just a little bit, because this is important. I think it would be a big miss to come to this passage and just say, oh, the office of overseer, and then just move on. What is the office of overseer? What is the office of elder? Well, there are several passages. I'm not going to keep switching on the left side there. I've pasted them into the slide so that we can sort of see that, and I've already got them highlighted and stuff. But elders and their work are described here in this passage, 1 Timothy chapter 3. They're described in Titus chapter 1 for a few verses, and they're also described in Acts chapter 20 and 1 Peter chapter 5. Okay? Now, the list that we find in Titus chapter 1 is very similar to this one. Okay? It's like Titus and 1 Timothy were written almost back to back. Very similar. So we're not going to look at that. I do want to look at a couple of verses in Acts 20 and 1 Peter 5, though, because this is what sets up, we can keep coming back to this, this is what sets up this role of overseer. Okay, who or what or whatever. In Acts chapter 20, let me give you the setting here. Paul is on his way back to Jerusalem. It's his third missionary trip. And he knows that when he gets to Jerusalem, he is going to be, he's positive, he's going to be arrested, and he doesn't know what the fallout is going to be from that. So on his way past Ephesus, you know how you get into a group of friends and you just don't stop talking, right? It's like, it's time for bed and nobody leaves. Right, you're friends, and you keep talking, and the kid, and just the whole thing. It's just a really good time. Well, Paul knew that that's what would happen if he actually went into Ephesus. He said, I can't go into Ephesus. There's no way for me to go in there. So what they did is they stopped at a town a little bit away called Miletus. And he sent a note and said, would the elders please come see me for a few minutes while on my way back? Okay, this is early in Acts chapter 20, so we don't have the whole thing right there. And he talks to them for at least a few minutes, and they give their farewells and their goodbyes. And it says in Acts, they're not sure if they're ever going to see him again. So this is very emotional. This is why you can't get the whole church involved. They'd have a potluck, and it'd just be a mess. So you can't do that, okay? But at least I can talk to the elders. And here are some of the things that he told them. And starting in verse 28, he said, "Be on guard for yourselves, elders, and for all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers." Now, isn't that interesting? We've got the same word, overseer. The Greek word is episkopos. Any takers on what English word we get from episkopos? Episcopal, Episcopalian, okay? It's a compound word. Epi means on or over. Skopos is scope, which means to see. And so episkopos means to oversee. Woo! See, this is great. You guys know Greek. It's perfect. It's beautiful, right? Elder is a different word. It's presbyteros. We're not really all that sharp. We just steal words from other languages and say, look how brilliant we are. Presbyterian is where we get that. It just means elder. It can mean an old person, an older man, older woman, depending on the gender of the noun. It can mean an office. It can mean a role. It can mean somebody who's more mature. So it has all of that range of meanings. So he called the presbyteroi, the elders. He now refers to them, says the Holy Spirit has made you episkopoi, overseers, to do something, to shepherd the church of God. The word shepherd, the noun shepherd is, and verb actually, is translated shepherd all the way through the Bible. In the Old Testament, when it was translated into Greek, always shepherd. In the New Testament, all the way through shepherd, except for one time. One time, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. In Ephesians 4:11, the same exactly the word is used. And he himself gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, and some as shepherds and teachers. This is the only time in the whole Bible that this word is not translated shepherd. It's translated pastor, which comes from the similar root as pasture, which is what a shepherd does with his flock. He takes them out to pasture. That's all a pastor is somebody who does the work of shepherding. Isn't that interesting? So an elder is somebody who is possibly older in age, possibly older in maturity, but it is a role. It's a specific role. That's usually the word that is used for this role. It's often the word that's used for this role. Overseer is a task, what they're supposed to do, and shepherd is a task, what they're supposed to do. To shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and from your own selves, the team of elders, the team of overseers. From within the group of overseers are going to come wolves, speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. The thing that the elders are supposed to watch out for the most in this passage is false teaching. And that starts with the people who hold the microphone. That starts from within their own group. You've got to keep your own group solid because they're going to start teaching stuff and they're going to start these little personality cults and they will draw people away to themselves instead of pointing them to Christ. Paul said that's the number one thing that I urge you on as literally some of my last words to you. This is something you have to watch out for. I think that's a big deal. When we go over to the summary. Elders are overseers and shepherds. A main priority is protecting the flock from false doctrine. When we go over to 1 Peter chapter 5, completely different apostle. The first one was Paul. Now we have Peter. Watch this. Therefore, I urge the elders among you. There's our presbyteros. That's our first word. As your fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and one who is also a fellow partaker of the glory that is to be revealed, what's the first thing he tells them to do? What's the verb? Shepherd. There's our word. 2 words, both times Peter and Paul. Shepherd the flock of God among you. That's twice now that the church is referred to as a flock. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight. That's the verb form of overseer. So 2 apostles, 2 different writings, 2 different groups use the exact same 3 words. Do you think maybe this is how we're supposed to look at the role and the office of pastor, elder, overseer in the church? Not doing it under compulsion, but voluntarily. That sort of fits in with the, if a man wants or if a person wants to be an overseer, he desires a good work. According to the will of God, not with greed. Okay, so that's one thing that we will actually see in 1 Timothy, but with eagerness. Not as domineering over those who are assigned. Now, isn't this interesting? 2 things. Not domineering, not lording it over, some translations say, which we will also see in 1 Timothy. Those who are assigned to your charge. So there is, as part of this overseeing, elders, pastors are supposed to see the flock as these are the ones that we are accountable for. It's one of the reasons why membership, some kind of formal membership, I think is still important. A lot of churches have gone away from a formal membership, and I think that there are a couple of pieces where a formal membership is still important. Because if there is a flock that is allotted, is commissioned or whatever to a group of elders, they've got to know who that flock is, right? They've got to know who's part of it and who's not part of it. You can't just say, well, every Christian in South Bend is part of my flock, part of Gary's flock. It doesn't work that way. There's got to be some kind of boundary on it. Just because somebody shows up, does that automatically mean, hey, they've joined the flock? Because, popping in and out all the time? There's some thoughts that we still need to understand. We still need to be careful with those assigned to your care, but by proving to be examples to the flock. So that's Peter's take on things, okay? And so shepherd and oversee, same thing as we're seeing in Paul, according to God's direction, not for the money. Don't lord it over the people, but instead be examples, and the flock is entrusted to them. So now that we understand a little bit of where they're coming from, what does this look like? What are some of these character traits or these qualifications? Okay, I really think that this is why, what we just looked at is why this list of qualifications or character traits or whatever is so important, right? Because it's an important role. If you want to be a part of it, that's wonderful. That's awesome. I would like Paul, I would encourage you to consider if you would like to be in a church leadership role. But if you do, here's the list. Okay? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each one because most of them are self-explanatory. What we see in the text, I've got a little phrase usually right next to it. Some of the Greek words are interesting. I've got them on there just because, because some of them have some really neat English counterparts that I'll be able to point out to you. But for the most part, we're focused on the English side. So, what does one of these elders, overseers, pastors, shepherds, what are they to look like? Verse 2, the overseer then must be, here's the list. Number 1, above reproach. Above reproach, irreproachable, without fault. Does this mean perfect? No, because then again, nobody qualifies. But it's similar to blameless. Blameless doesn't mean perfect. Blameless means you're not typically going to blame them. I mean, it's a good way to think of it. If let's just be honest. If something happened, I think we talked about this in second hour some time ago. If there is an embezzlement, we were missing money in the church, or we're missing equipment, or there's something happens. The place burns down and it looks like insurance fraud because it looks like there's arson and it's whatever, right? If something bad happens, if I'm the first person you think of, if Gary is the first person, you can think of him, don't think of him. If Gary is the first person you think of, we probably shouldn't be elders, right? If we are the first person you think of when something goes bad, not like there's a tech glitch or something, obviously some stuff like that happens. But if something is bad, if something is wrong, if there is a potential scandal brewing, and Gary and I are the first people you think of, like, man, they did it again, we probably shouldn't be elders based on this right here. Right? It doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that we will never be able to accept the blame for things, but we should be generally blameless, generally irreproachable, generally without fault. That's what we're looking for. Okay? Number 2. In our English text, it says the husband of one wife. Okay? Several different things that we can do with this. I could spend an entire session just on this one. Okay? Not going to. But just a couple of thoughts, and we can work through it a little bit more in second hour if you'd like. But here are some important thoughts. First of all, the Greek phrase does not say husband of one wife. The Greek phrase says a one-woman man. And if this is, and this is my opinion, but because it's in the middle of character traits, I don't think this has to do so much with a person's marriage as it has to do with their character. Because Paul could have phrased it a little bit differently and made it say a husband of one wife. He didn't. I would prefer to read this, and I didn't put it in the English, but a one-woman type of man. What is his character when it relates to women? Okay? Because some people have said, the husband of one wife, if you're not married, you can't not be an elder. If you've been divorced, you cannot be a pastor. Obviously, I'm using elder and pastor and overseer interchangeably. That's how they're used throughout the Bible. If we have to play this all the way out, if you're a widower and remarried, not one wife anymore. Okay? If that's how you interpret a husband of one wife, then there's all sorts of things. You say, well, maybe it's just a husband of one wife at a time. Okay? Cannot be polygamist. That could be, because polygamy is all over the place in the Old and New Testament. In fact, this would be the only place in the entire Bible where it is completely prohibited. Okay? And maybe that was part of the things that was in Paul's mind, is that, even if other people do it, an elder shouldn't. Okay, and there's all sorts of reasons for that we can, again, hash through later if you'd like. I think of it as a character trait. A person can be the husband of one wife. A man can be the husband of one wife and not a one-woman type of person, right? He can be a womanizer. He can be chasing everything. He can be all over the place. But I'm only married to one woman. Is that what we want? Is that who should be leading the church? No. So again, I think it's a character trait. How does this man interact with women? Is he a one-woman guy, married or not? Or is he go all over the place? Temperate, sober, self-controlled. This one is especially with reference to alcohol. Self-controlled with reference to alcohol. Doesn't say not drinking at all, but it just says self-controlled with reference to alcohol. Oops. Thoughtful or self-controlled. Now, it does say self-controlled. This is self-controlled in other areas as well. So alcohol is a specific area he pointed out that you've got to be controlled in. Now you also have to be controlled with other areas of your life. Be thoughtful in other areas of your life. Respectable. Now, this one's interesting. This one's interesting because last week we saw that women are supposed to be well-ordered, right? And it comes from this Greek word kosmos or kosmia. It's the same word. It's the exact same word that we've already seen with well-ordered with women in chapter 2. Now he's using the same word in chapter 3 to describe elders: respectable, honorable, appropriate. Apparently, there is a level of appropriateness that an elder should show. Okay, some people might prefer the term gravitas. It's a word that you don't hear very often anymore. Gravitas. There's a level of respectability. Okay, not joking around. Not that joking around is or sarcasm or whatever is bad. You can have fun. You can have all that, but that shouldn't be the characteristic of church elders. That shouldn't be the thing that the first thing you think about when you think about a church elder is, man, that guy's a jokester. If the number one task, if the primary task is making sure that we handle the scriptures well, that we are protecting the flock from wolves and false teaching, jokester, prankster, comedian is probably not supposed to be at the top of the list, right? There has to be a level of gravitas. Not that we can't have any fun, but that we have to be serious because this is a serious role. This is a serious task that we have to do. Respectable, honorable, well-ordered, appropriate, respectable. Hospitable. Hospitable. You know the term xenophobia, right? Xenophobia. Phobia is fear. Xenos is strangers. Basically, a xenophobia, if you hear in the news or whatever, oh, you're just xenophobic. That just means that you're afraid of strangers, is really what it means, okay? Well, this actually flips it around, and it's philoxenon. It's not the fear of strangers, it's actually the love of strangers. Phileo, loving strangers. Well, how does that play out? Hospitality. Hospitality, okay? Hospitable. This person should be skillful in teaching, an able teacher, didacticon. Didactic, it's where we get didactic, being able to teach. It doesn't mean, and we'll see this in chapter 5, it doesn't mean that every elder is a teacher on a regular basis, but there is a level of ability. If the main job of an elder, if the main job of a pastor, of an overseer is to protect the flock from false teaching, they should be able to do true teaching, right? Sound teaching. Even if they're not the one who does it all the time, they have to be available and able to do that. They have to be didactic. They have to be able to think through things. Again, he comes back to alcohol, not a drunkard, not addicted to wine. Okay, this is not something. It's really interesting. If we tear the word apart, the first part there of the paroinon, the par means to be alongside, sort of like a parachurch organization comes alongside the church. Okay, a paralegal is not the attorney, but somebody who comes alongside the attorney to do legal work. It's the same idea. A paramedic, we use that phrase all the time. Same thing here. It's you don't want the guy or the guys, the people, your elders, you don't want their best friend to be wine. You don't want them to know. Again, it's not banning alcohol here. You're not going to see that anywhere. It's not banning alcohol, but you don't want your elders to have a close relationship with alcohol like a paralegal does with the lawyer. Okay? It's a little too close to alcohol. If they're always coming up alongside their favorite drink. Okay? Not addicted to wine, and I would extend this beyond just wine, but to alcohol as well. The net translates it not a drunkard, okay? Not violent. Not violent. It's really interesting. The word includes the concept of being a bully, okay? So not a bully in their private life at home, not a bully to their wives, not a bully to their children, but also not a bully to their churches, right? What did Peter say? Not lording it over, not abusing their flock. I've seen this so many times, where the guy with the microphone just rails on the church, just constantly berates them. I don't even know why you'd want to stay in a place like that. Okay? Some people stay in marriages like that because there's a whole lot of other things. But if you're in a church like that, I don't know why you don't just leave. It's an abusive relationship. Your elders should not be abusive, should not be bullies, individually or to the congregation. Not violent, but instead gentle, not contentious, and free from the love of money. Now, this one's interesting because all three of these show up for all believers. This isn't just elders now. Some of these things are, elders are supposed to be an example, and, nobody's supposed to be a drunkard or a bully and that sort of thing. But these three are used specifically. These are to be character traits of all believers. In Titus chapter 3, all believers are supposed to be kind and peaceable. And all over the place, Matthew chapter 6, and then we will see this again in 1 Timothy chapter 6, not to love money. In fact, it's in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, that we find that famous verse, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money is the root of all kinds of evil, but the love of money. Don't love stuff. Right? So this isn't just for elders, this is for everybody. All right? Keep on going down the list. We have a new thing now. He's sort of going to shift up a little bit. Now he goes into the elder's home. So far we've been talking primarily about a public persona. We've been talking about, in the local church. Now we're going to take a field trip and go to the elder's house. Come on in. How are you at home too? Really? My home life is part of these character traits? Absolutely. Because the church is a family of families. And if you can't, Paul's going to say this, if you can't manage your home, how in the world are you supposed to be on a team that manages a bunch of families if you can't manage one family? Okay, these things just make sense, don't they? I mean, we shouldn't have to say them. They just sort of make sense. But here he says, starting in verse 4, he must manage his own household well and keep his children in control without losing his dignity. Well, we all fail there. Oh, completely lost that one. But if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for the church of God? So, managing his own home, his own household well. And then there's these three phrases that I say help explain what this means. And of course, why it's important in this context. First of all, holding his children in a state of submission to his leadership. That seems like it's a bully, right? Doesn't it seem like you must obey me, submit to me, bow to me? Again, that sort of bleeds over into lording it over and bully, okay? Can you lead your home well? Can your children be in a state of submission and you not be a bully? I think you can. I think it's possible. And that's what we're looking for in our elders, in our church leaders, is someone who can manage people, including his own children, without bullying them, without always blowing up at them, or to use the phrase, with all dignity. I guarantee you, my children aren't home anymore, and they're certainly not children, young children anymore, but I guarantee you I've broken this one many times over the years. Okay? For those who knew me when I was much, much younger, anger and pride both, anger, and they sort of go together, anger was a huge problem for me. And it didn't magically go away when I had kids. In fact, if I thought it was going away, it didn't, right? It's like, no, I'm not gone yet, buddy. And I can think, and I hope, and I pray that my children's memories, have been wiped of some of these things. But I guarantee you there's things in my memory that I wish never happened from myself as a father to my children. I guarantee you there are still things that come to mind every once in a while. And I'll just tear up because I can't believe I actually did that or said that or whatever. I certainly did not always keep my children in submission and subjection in all dignity or with all dignity. Hopefully that's the exception, not the rule. right? That's the exception, not the rule. Doesn't mean I'm not qualified, doesn't mean that I'm not fit. There may be all sorts of other reasons, but I don't think that's the one. But maybe back then somebody would have looked at me and said, this is an area you probably need to work on, buddy, if you're going to stay in this role, right? Because this is how we should generally, these are character traits. It's a whole lot easier to do that when you don't have kids at home. I'm just telling you, if you wait until your kids are gone, this one's easy, no problem. It's interesting, though, that this word, it's got in the net, it says in control, keep his children in control. On my slide, I say a state of submission. This is the same word we saw in chapter 2 when women actually, not just wives, but wives are supposed to submit to the authority. In chapter 2, it was willingly, voluntarily, I am placing myself. The word just means to rank under. It's used in the military a lot. You got military ranks, you know what the chain of command is, you know what the authority is, it's no problem. In chapter 2, Paul said, women, recognize your place. Okay, recognize your place in the chain of authority in the local church. Okay, and when it comes to teaching, that's not your place in the local church to the congregation. All right, here it's not children voluntarily submit yourself to your parents. It's husbands, keep your children in that, keep them in line, keep them under control, but you have to do it with all dignity. And of course, the question is, because if you can't, and it's not even just if you can't, if someone doesn't know how, if someone's not able and they don't even, if they just don't know how to do it at home with a little family, how in the world are they supposed to do it with a big family? Okay? And again, we're not perfect, but this should be the general character trait of our elders. Now, this brings up a couple of thoughts. Number one, this, along with a one-woman type of man, is why I think that this role is restricted to qualified men. Okay? Even in today's world, you can play all the word games that you want, but a woman cannot be a one-woman type of man. No matter what they say, a woman cannot be a one-woman type of man. Only a man can be a one-woman type of man. That one you could argue if that's the only thing it said, but the fact that Paul linked it to the family, and he's already said in chapter 2, it's the husband's job, it's the father's job to teach the family. We've seen this all the way through the scriptures. This is the setup that God has designed. And because he links the family to the church and reminds us that the church is a family of families, if the structure is this way in the home, then the structure is also this way in the family. Or in the church. If the structure is this way in the home, in the family, then this is also the structure of the church. And this is, when you put all this together, I think this is why elders are to be men only. But not just any men. Okay, this is the whole, women in ministry. Can women be pastors? No, women can't be pastors. Oh, you're vilifying women. You're, pushing women out of ministry. No, pushing most men out of ministry too. Just equal opportunity offender here, okay? Because most men shouldn't be elders either, should they? Okay, now, most men should be elder. I mean, we'd love it if all men, but there are a lot of people. It's not just, okay, women are the only people who can't be elders, can't be pastors. This list right here, and the one in Titus chapter 1, and when you bring 1 Peter 5 and Acts chapter 20 all together, you look at this and you say, yeah, when you look out over the vast majority of the church, it really does limit this down. So I like to say, it's not just, well, who can be pastors? Men can be pastors. Nope. Who can be pastors, elders, overseers? Qualified men can be pastors, elders, overseers. Qualified men. So, guys, it used to be, if you're thinking about, guys, if this is something that you'd think that you would like, that's awesome. That's fantastic. If you think that you would make a good elder, a good pastor, good overseer, absolutely talk to me or Gary about that. That would be fantastic. But know what you're getting into and take a look at the character traits. Okay, there's actually a couple more. He's not done. What else? What else? Oh, no, there's one more question. What about men who aren't married or who don't have children? Can they be elders? Okay, here's my response to that. I'm just going to read you the couple bullet points that I have in my notes here. I didn't put them up on the screen, but since potential elders, I like the way when I'm putting my notes together, I love the way I phrase it. You really should listen to these messages on Thursday instead of Sunday, because they're so powerful when I'm actually doing. Since potential elders must first be examined, we will see that in chapter 5. Before being appointed to their work, a man could be deemed qualified even without a wife or children. I don't think anything in here says that they have to be married and they have to have children. But if he does have a family, number one, they're his first priority. My family is my first priority. Okay? My wife comes before you. Just telling you, that's the way it is. When I had children at home, one of the things I used to say, and some of you weren't here back then, when I had children at home, I used to say, and I said, please understand what I mean when I say this, my family is more important than your family. It's just the way it is. My family is more important than your family. Not that you're not important, but your family should be more important to you than my family is too. It's the way it is, okay? We work for each other's benefit. We watch out for the interests of each other. We do all of that stuff like Paul said, like Jesus said, all the New Testament writers. We love each other, the whole thing. But when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, my number one responsibility outside of me and God is my wife and me. And then my children and me. Then we can start talking about other stuff outside of that. Because if I can't even manage my own house, how in the world do I think that I should be able to lead a church? And I tell you, I have seen far too many pastors' kids, far too many pastors' wives who felt and many times said that the church was their dad, their husband's first priority, and they always felt second class. There are pastors' wives out there today who joke, but there's a lot of truth in it, and there's a lot of hurt in their voice and eyes when they joke that the church is their husband's mistress. That's garbage. That should never, ever be the case. That shouldn't be the case in church. It shouldn't be the case at work. Whatever, that absolutely should never be the case. Okay? My first priority after myself and God is Sarah Lynn. She knows that. Do I do it always perfectly? Of course not. Absolutely. I'm not perfect, right? But that should be my character trait. And then my family. Again, it's a whole lot easier once your kids are gone. So I'm nailing this one. This is perfect. Then your family. I don't know. I can't tell you how many pastors' kids I've seen over the years grow up and want nothing to do with the church because the church stole their dad. Their dad was never home. They always had a meeting, always had a service, always had something else going on, never was at the ball games. Never. I'm not saying you can't miss those things. I'm not saying stuff doesn't come up. But again, this is true for church. This is true for work. This is true for everything. But especially in the church world, how can you manage a church if you can't even manage your own home? And so many kids grow up, their dads were pastors, and they want nothing to do with the church because all they saw was either the church was horrible to their dad, constantly beat up, constantly dad came home tired and crying and everything because the church was horrible. I've seen that too many times. And in my 20 years here, I appreciate that has not been the case from you to me. Can't speak for Gary, but I'm hoping that he would say the same thing. But again, if you're going to beat up on somebody, we have two. Okay, just no, of course not. And number two, they leave the church. Pastors' kids leave the church in alarming numbers because the church stole their dad, is how they see it. And they want nothing to do with the church who took their dad out of their home. And years ago, when I had little kids at home, I told the church at that time, I said, it's not going to happen. I will leave this church before I leave my family, before I let my kids grow up and hate the church and hate God because their dad was never home. He said, it's not going to happen. I can go to a new church. I can get another job. I can do all sorts of things. I do not have to do this. I will protect my family. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm not saying that I think God has honored that. When I look at my children, I think God has honored that. Okay? And I praise God for that. I praise God for the people who were in my life who had this conversation with me that many years ago. And said, buddy, if you think that this is what you want to do, here's some things you better be thinking about. Okay? Doesn't mean it's, you say, oh, that hasn't been my story. Is it too late to change? I don't think it's too late to change. I think that there may be some consequences because consequences do follow us, right? But this is the type of person that you want as your leader. So if they're not married, if they don't have children, can they be elders? I think yes. I think they can if they meet these other character traits, if this is their other stuff, because they have to be examined like we will see in chapter 5. All right, just a couple of things in verses 6 and 7, and we'll wrap up here with elders today. This is important. This is important, and we'll talk about deacons next week. A couple more character traits that we see in verses 6 and 7. He must not be a recent convert. The Greek word is interesting. It's neophyte. It's neophyte. Literally, it means newly planted. Newly planted. Think of like a young sprout of a plant that you've just potted somewhere. He can't be newly planted. Most people understand this not like, there's churches where they move their pastors around, right? I don't think that's what it means. You can't be an elder because you've been newly planted in this location. I don't think that's what it can be, because then everybody in that denomination or system is messed up. But most translations, most scholars really do think of this as a recent convert. They cannot be newly saved. They cannot be newly saved. They shouldn't be elders if they're newly saved, because he may become arrogant and fall into the punishment that the devil will exact. That's just weird wording in the net translation there. It just really is. Fall into the devil's condemnation, maybe your Bible says. Fall into the devil's punishment. So the question is the devil doing it? That's how the net Bible takes it. Or is it the same thing that the devil is going to get? Okay? And the reason that a lot of people think that is because of this concept of arrogance. They say that the devil's main problem was pride. And if the devil's main problem was pride, if you see the devil's fall, if you see Satan's fall in Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, both of those have this hubris, this arrogance, this pride coming out of his mouth. And they say that's what led to his sin, that's what led to his fall. If you get somebody new, who's brand new believer or newly converted, new believer, and you elevate them to a position of leadership too quickly, they can get prideful. And they can fall the same way that Satan fell. You become conceited in his new position. Also, verse 7, he must be well thought of by those outside the faith. Now this just takes a whole left turn right here. Everything so far has been within the church, his personal life, his home life, his spiritual growth, the whole thing. Now Paul says, oh yeah, and there's one more thing. I want you to get references from unbelievers. Isn't that interesting? If the unbelieving world cannot speak well of this person, if all they have to say is negative things, it's not a person that you want leading or in the leadership team of your church. You've got to be able to be spoken well of by unbelievers, those outsiders, outside the church, outside the faith. Almost to the point of getting references, have a good testimony. Because number one, he gives a couple of warnings. Number one, so that he may not fall into disgrace. And not to add to the Bible or anything, but I would take this a step further, not just so that he doesn't fall into disgrace, but what happens in a local church when a pastor, or the pastor, in those cases where it's the pastor, right, just one, when the pastor has a scandal, what happens to the local church? The whole thing has a scandal, and sometimes it closes. I read of one just this week, a church in Tennessee, where there was a scandal with one of the pastors, one of the elders, and ultimately the whole church just closed. The whole church just shut down. They had to shut its doors because everybody in the community knew what happened. They no longer had a good testimony with those outside the church, which means there is something to be said about how does our community view our church. It's actually better for the community to not know we're here than to know that we have a scandal. Now, it's not good if they don't know we're here, but it's better if they don't know we're here than to know. The only thing they know about us is scandal, scandal, scandal. Okay? Don't elevate someone too soon. Don't elevate someone too soon. Not only can they get arrogant, not only can they get conceited, but they also have to be thought well of by those outside so that they don't fall into disgrace and drag the church with them. And this is the second time he brings up the devil, which, interestingly, Paul almost never uses this phrase. Only half a dozen times or so in all of his letters does he refer to the devil. Usually refers to Satan or something, but this phrase, because the word means the slanderer. It's not just talking about the Satan as a person, the devil as his person, but his character. Remember, this whole thing is about character. The whole thing is about character. And it ties back to how is the church supposed to live? What is the is? What is the ought? And the ought is all dignity, all godliness and in dignity. And if the church is supposed to live in dignity, then the church leaders have to be dignified people and have to have character traits that can lead, that can be examples, that can have good testimony outside the church, be caught by the devil's trap. I think that the devil's trap probably fits into that same concept of bringing the whole church down with it. That's my opinion. I think the devil's trap is, if I can get you, I get everything. Which is one good reason to not just have one. We have a whole team that we're going to see in chapter 5. You have a whole team of elders, which our whole team is 2 right now. That's fine. So, guys, if you meet these qualifications and you're interested, let's talk. Okay? We won't do it too quickly. We're going to have some time. There's some examination. Gary went through about a year's worth of examination. And we finally begrudge it? No, it's a process. It's a process. Okay? And I think that's the way it's supposed to be. So, this morning, all about elders. This whole section is about who is supposed to be the primary leaders of the church. Those are elders. These are overseers. Those are shepherds. The people, these are the jobs that they're supposed to do. The primary thing is watch out for false teaching. Make sure that we have sound, healthy teaching. And this is the type of person that you should have, or people, men that you should have. So, ladies, this one does not have a direct application to you, okay? Other than understand how the church is supposed to function, what's supposed to happen. Pray for the men in this church. Pray for the leaders in this church, okay? And understand how God has ordered this. And guys, how are you doing in your home life? How are you doing in your work life? How are you doing in your church life? And if those 3 seem to be pretty good, you're happy with those, you think that maybe this is something that you'd like to be involved in, let's talk.